And just an FYI, the YouTube live stream is starting now. And the video recording will start in a minute or two, or once we're ready.
All right, so well, we have council represented, and we've definitely got a quorum. So I think we can go ahead and start. I'll call the meeting to order officially. And Alan, I believe you're going to be doing the roll call for us. And Lisa will be presenting her inspiration at the end of the roll call.
Sounds good. So Lisa Pierce, present. Joshua Samin, present. Sunali Shanti Sikand, or Sonali, present. Dina Allen. Dina?
I'm here. I'm here.
Woody Hastings?
Here.
Kenna Lee?
Here.
Alexander Goodman? Alex Goodman? Nope. Looks like he's joining us right now. All right. Sarah Elliott?
Here.
Alexander Goodman, are you present?
Here.
Thank you. Gerald Glazer? Jerry Glazer?
I'm here.
Sarah Blade Gurney?
I'm here.
Luke Lindenbush?
Here.
And Diana Rich? Looks like she's not in here yet. Okay. So that concludes roll call.
Great, thank you. Lisa, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay. Ken asked me to think of what inspires me. I'm just going to keep it super brief. But I've always been moved and inspired by people who aren't afraid to step out of the comfort of going with the crowd around them. People who dared to speak out against slavery, even if they were surrounded by slaveholders, or in more current times, Liz Cheney daring to take an unpopular position among Republicans. I find that moving and inspiring, and I admire that kind of courage.
Thank you so much. So poor Lisa was really stressed when I was like, share your inspiration, thinking that she had to come up with like kind of a comprehensive, in-depth look at her motivations for doing this work. So just to clarify, I'm going to be asking each of you in turn to step up and share something. And just like Lisa did, I'm not asking you to present your whole life biography, just something that inspires you, that can inspire all of us. And the reason for doing this is just so we get to know each other a little bit better, and but don't give a lot of time to kind of team building activities. So this is a sneaky team building activity that will just fold into our meetings. So next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes, and that's Joshua. I think you're going to read those.
So we've kind of adopted this format where in lieu of taking minutes, which is to say an exhaustive record of the meeting, we're kind of focusing on the action items. So I'm kind of doing the action item recap that we looked at previously. And on that front, we said that there would be some update between Sebastopol City Council and planning with a facilitation subcommittee about the Brown Act implications and the issues there. So that has happened, and that will be brought up in an agenda item pretty soon. Diana said that she was going to draft a resolution to the city about the endorsement of the Climate Save California agenda. We'll also have a report on that. Kenna was going to create a survey about prioritizing the Sebastopol climate action recommendations for the city, which we'll also be covering later. And general homework for everybody was to look over the Sebastopol chapter of the Climate Action Plan, which we will also be discussing later. So I think we're in pretty good shape.
Great, thank you so much, Joshua. So this is a public meeting. Is there any member of the public present who would like to provide comment on anything that is not listed in the regular agenda? All right, I don't see anyone speaking up, so we will move on. And statements of conflict of interest. I'm hoping we can, if anybody has a conflict of interest that they feel like they understand they are supposed to reveal at this time. And we don't have any real decisions on the agenda for today, so it's not really important that anyone speak up. But this is something that will stay on our agenda, just as a reminder that we may at any given point, there may be one or two people who feel like, there's an item on the agenda that they shouldn't vote on because they have a personal financial stake, et cetera. And Larry will be covering kind of our larger legal responsibilities, particularly for the Brown Act at the next stage. So we're ready to move on unless someone is waving at me. I don't see anyone waving like, please, I need to confess my conflicts of interest. We'll go on to our regular agenda. And maybe Diana or someone could tell me, is it okay for me to just ask if there's do I need to ask for public comment at each agenda item, or can I ask at the beginning, is there anyone who wants to speak to certain agenda items so that we can plan it that way?
I'm going to defer to our city attorney who is in the room, Larry.
All right. Thank you. I have to take my video off because I've already been bounced out of the meeting once. And so I do apologize for that. Apparently there's some connectivity problems going on here. So I'm going to try and take my video off and hope that I don't lose the audio. Typically, boards and commissions take the public comments on each item as the item is reached on the agenda. The reason for that is provide more meaningful information to the board, the commission, to hear the public's view on the particular item at the time you've already heard the staff report for the item. It's just more useful that way. It actually would be legal to do it any way that you like. I mean, you could ask for comments all at one time, but most boards and commissions do it that way.
So
Okay.
just to follow up on that, Kenna, at the city council level, what we do is the agenda item is presented, and then city council members are invited to ask questions. Then the public is invited to comment, and then it comes back to the city council for discussion. So that's one approach.
Gotcha. So we may feel our way through this as we evolve as a commission or committee or subcommittee or whatever we are. But for today, we'll just try to take it point by point. So the first two, which is the items, which are clarification of Brown Act requirements, implications, and then also just discussing this issue of what is our name and do we need a resolution to change it or not? It's on the agenda as discussing a resolution because when I wrote the agenda, that was what I thought we needed, but apparently we may not. Larry is going to address both of those items. Is there anyone from the public that wants to address either of those items, or should we just let Larry go for it? All right, let's go. Larry, take it away.
I will try and be brief. Lawyers have trouble with that, but I'll try my very best. I have offered to return at a subsequent time for a full-scale PowerPoint and all Brown Act presentation if you feel like you would like that, or any other subject where I have been of assistance. So I'd be happy to do that. Today I just kind of want to address the whole why are you subject to the Brown Act and what are the ramifications of that? And I just wanted to do that very briefly. Up until 2 years ago, most public agencies were only subject to the Brown Act on the committee level if there was a quorum or more of their governing body on that committee. In other words, if you had less than a quorum of the council or they're less than a quorum of a commission, they could hold a committee meeting and they were not subject to the Brown Act. They could hold it in private if they wished. They did not have to publish agendas or have the public present. because they had less than a quorum of the governing body. But that was changed a few years ago, such that the Brown Act now includes what are called standing committees. And believe me, to cut to the chase, you are a standing committee. That's why you're subject to the Brown Act. That's why you print and you publish and put out agendas. That's why the public is invited to participate and speak, etc. And all the rest of the Brown Act provisions apply. A standing committee is a committee that has continuing subject matter jurisdiction. That's kind of the legal way of putting it. What it really means is it has a very broad mandate. It has no definitive time period that it's going to be in existence. It doesn't have a very specific narrow goal that it's trying to reach. It's much broader than that. So that committee may stay in existence for a very long time, kind of an indefinite time. And if that's where you find yourself, then you are definitely a standing committee and therefore subject to the Brown Act. Examples of standing committees, give you a couple of them. First of all, we have a city council agenda setting committee. Our city council agenda is set by a committee of the mayor and the vice mayor. Each year, traditionally, the mayor and the vice mayor change, and they're different individuals, but the committee remains and continues to meet week after week, month after month, year after year, continues to meet and set the city council agendas. So because there's no end date for it, its mission is basically never accomplished, so to speak, then it is known as a standing committee. And so for our agenda setting committee, we do publish agendas, and theoretically, if the public wanted to attend, they could. Another one a little bit closer to home might be an example of our Zero Waste Committee. Our Zero Waste Committee was meeting regularly every month until the pandemic hit, and they haven't met during the pandemic, but are going to start meeting again in March. That committee is also a standing committee. It looks at the various things that we as a city can do to promote less landfill, to have zero waste promoting measures in our town for our businesses and for our public gatherings, for our city business, council business, and city governance. They continue to look at ways that we can improve, and they work on that constantly, month after month, with no end date in sight for completing their mission, so to speak. So for that reason, they are a standing committee as well, and they have published agendas, taken minutes, they've let the public in, and so into their meetings and so forth. And since I have attended every one of those meetings while it was meeting before the pandemic, I can tell you that as a practical matter, there really were no issues whatsoever with zero waste complying with the Brown Act. Welcome, members of the public.
I stopped you
Nothing
for 1
overwhelming
second.
or detrimental ever happened. It was just a kind of thing which became really quite routine in short order. An example of an ad hoc committee. In an ad hoc committee, to give you another city council level example, we were going to look at the design of a particular project that was coming before the council. So the council looked at the project and said, gee, we think that design could be some fine-tuned. There's some things we can do with that design to make it better. So we won't take city council time to do that. The council appointed a couple of its members to act as kind of a design committee to take a look at one particular project. That was their only thing they were going to do. They looked at the project. When they were done looking at the project and came back to the council with a report, that was the end of that committee. So that committee was not subject to the Brown Act. That committee was an ad hoc committee formed for that one limited purpose and limited duration. So that's a good example, I think, of a committee that is not subject to the Brown Act. Just want to say finally, kind of in closing the subject maybe, that Just because I say that if you're an ad hoc committee, you don't need to have the public present, or you could meet theoretically in secret, so to speak, that doesn't mean you have to do it that way. Plenty of ad hoc committees just welcome the public in and feel that they are better able to, the best thing they can do in their function is to have the public involved. And you can do that regardless of whether you have to or not. You could always have the public in. So we think in Sebastopol, we're all about transparency. We're about open meetings and open government. That's where we're about, what we're about. That's the very basis of the Brown Act. So in some ways, it almost doesn't matter, except of course that you have to have a staff person post your agendas because you're a standing committee, and you have to meet the technical requirements of the Brown Act. And so your agendas are posted and minutes are taken, and the public is allowed to speak on every item. You'd probably do that anyway. But that's just the more technical provisions since you're subject to the Brown Act. So that's kind of my 5 or 10 minute kind of summary of why the Brown Act applies to you and what some of the ramifications are. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have about that.
Lisa,
And
do you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think what we probably maybe the only thing we really care about with the Brown Act is what does it mean for us to meet in small groups? Are we allowed to do that? Are there kind of restrictions on that? Like, are we allowed to talk to each other, to send each other emails about issues? That's what we really care about, I think.
okay, well, I'll kind of get into the committee and subcommittee and all those terms in a minute to kind of define some of them for you, which I think is the other item. But you are a committee. You're officially designated committee of the city council, and you could form kind of subcommittees if you wanted to, which would be a smaller number of you who meet together and talk about more narrowly defined subject matter, I would assume. And as a smaller subcommittee, you would not be subject to the Brown Act. You can kind of meet if you want to in somebody's living room, or pandemic wise, you could be meeting just together in Zoom, or you could call each other on the telephone, however you want to meet. But basically the Brown Act wouldn't not be applying to your smaller, you could call it committee of the committee. Basically, I would call it a subcommittee. So you can do that, and then you can exchange documents. The only thing you don't want to do, you have a defined number of individuals which form your basic committee, the Climate Action Committee. You don't want a quorum of that constituting a subcommittee. You want less than a majority of your full committee membership to be on that subcommittee. And as such, you can talk to each other freely, exchange documents, look at drafts, reject drafts, do a better draft, throw that one away and do a final draft. You can go through all those kinds of things that subcommittees do, and you don't have to worry about the Brown Act causing something pitfall there.
Thank you.
So Larry, just to kind of reiterate and sum up, I think we can split into subcommittees of 5 or less who are, and as long as we stay in those groups of 5 or less, given that there's 11 voting members, then those people could do a shared Google document, anything like that they want to work together. And the carefulness they need to exert around that is about not then sharing that with other members of the committee.
Right. I don't want to start using technical terms and all that, but the people who think about the Brown Act, sometimes you hear the term serial meetings. Serial meetings are a very bad thing. They're how, some governments that try and operate who are not transparent kind of call each other up on the phone and say, can I get your vote? That kind of thing in a serial meeting. If documents are exchanged with a quorum of this committee, you're sort of trying to take some action out of public view. you're exchanging documents with each other, but you're not doing it at a meeting and you're not doing it in a way that's transparent. So you want to limit those documents that you're sharing to your subcommittee members and keep it less than a quorum, less than a majority of your committee. Then you can work on them all you want, not worry about having to share them with anybody. And when you fetch your final document, that will become the one that you submit.
Does anyone else have questions? Jerry, were you indicating you wanted to speak?
I did, but it was the topic of, serial meetings, and also that negates us being able to use things like collaboration sites and the like. So the only place we can actually do group work and get consensus or share ideas, more than getting consensus, sharing ideas, is in the context of the meeting or in the context of a subcommittee that's a smaller set and then back to the meeting. So it does make things go much slower.
Yes,
think
that's why that's why if you're an ad hoc committee, sometimes you don't want to do it the full public way. It just helps facilitate something. If you're trying to design something as an ad hoc committee, you really want to be able to kind of move fast. So, the Brown Act, no doubt, it does kind of slow it up sometimes.
So I think the chair group is very much hoping that we will divide up, because we have such a large menu of items to work on, that we'll be dividing up a large portion of the work into working groups or task force, or I'll maybe let Joshua address what we want to call them later. But that we'll be able to use those smaller groups to really move some of the work forward and then provide report outs at the larger committee meetings. Any questions before Larry moves on? Sarah? Yes, go ahead, Sarah.
I do want to just clarify one thing with you, Larry. Is it possible for Alan, for instance, to maintain the library of documents that different members might need at different times without that being an issue?
Yes, Alan will have to recognize me well, I'm sure, when he's got a public document, because public documents are subject to being looked at by members of the public. So, I mean, yes, but he can maintain those, absolutely.
Right, so if he were to assemble the key documents that this group is referring to over and over again, and then augment that list and have them all in one place for everybody, that would be okay, right?
Certainly, that's very okay.
Okay,
That's obviously also a public record,
okay, thanks.
which is a different law. The Public Records Act, another one.
All right, so do you want to move on? Do you have anything else to say about Brown Act, or do you want to move on to the name of our group?
I can happily move on. Reiterating my offer to return with full PowerPoint on Brown Act, should anybody like to hear that. I've seen some say no. So the committee question. You are a committee. I often make the mistake when I refer to committees, I find myself mistakenly sometimes saying, oh, they're a subcommittee. You're not a subcommittee. That comes from Robert's rules or something similar to Robert's rules. Nearly every city runs its meetings off a version of something like Robert's rules. Robert's rules were written for such things as service clubs, Kiwanis or Rotary, some other private club, where if you have a club, you form a kind of a subcommittee. So those terms are used kind of loosely. For city councils, every body that's created like this one by a city council, that is an actual committee. So your official title is committee. You'll just hear people informally refer to it as otherwise sometimes by mistake. And as I said, even I've done that from time to time. Sometimes I just can't help myself. I suddenly say, yeah, we'll talk to the subcommittee, but that's wrong. You are an official committee. And as such, you have council members on your committee. We don't think that's not really a legal issue. We just correct that. If we see the name is wrong, basically, we would just note it and correct it henceforth, and we would thereafter say, well, that is the city council committee.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Larry, there's a question. Jerry, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, it's just a point. When the question of the naming of the committee, I was a sustainability commissioner after chairing the committee that established that in Sunnyvale. And the name of sustainability might be more appropriate based on the portfolio of topics that the council sent for us to look at instead of just climate. And that looks at a whole bunch of things within the community that I don't think are covered by any other group outside of the council. And I think a lot of them will go together. And if there was a name change, maybe we could look at suggesting to the council that sustainability might be the right designation.
And the council would be the one to change the name if you requested it of them. You would make a request back to the council with your reasoning about that. The committee could ask that its name be changed if you wanted to go that way. And by the way, Zero Waste talked a few times about what were they going to be called. In fact, I almost heard somebody, task force. So, there's, city council sets the names of its committees, but there's lots of different names that theoretically could be used.
So we do have a space at the end of the agenda for members to suggest agenda topics for the next meeting. So that would be something that if we wanted to take it up, we could put on the agenda for next time. And we'll gather those at the end. Does anyone else have any questions or comments for Larry? Well, Larry, I will just say I am super appreciative that you boiled that Brown Act down from that hour-long PowerPoint to like 10 minutes. So thank you.
By the way, I was cleaning after a council meeting after I did a presentation on the Brown Act one time, and I was cleaning the council members' notes up to take back to City Hall, and I found a note on the top of one council member who must remain nameless, and that note was, "Wow, is this boring?" So that taught me not to present the PowerPoint right out the gate. Thanks for having me, and if anybody needs me to come back later in the meeting, you can text me, and I certainly will. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Larry. Okay, so I think we can move on. Diana is coming and going. So Diana, are you here and ready to report out on Climate Safe California?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. Thank you, Kenna. It's a pleasure to be here. So as you know, at the last meeting, the Climate Action Committee endorsed the Climate Safe California platform with a presentation by Woody Hastings. What I was instructed to do was draft a resolution. I am in the process of finalizing that resolution, and it does incorporate the platform that was approved by this committee and states within the resolution that this committee reviewed and endorsed the Climate Safe California platform. So that will be submitted to, is planned tentatively for the City Council meeting on March 2. We have Larry Robinson, who is with the Climate Center, lined up to do a presentation. And I'm also working with Larry Robinson to make sure that the resolution is aligned with the Climate Center's perspective on what needs to happen. And Sarah Gurney and I have been working on drafting all of that. So we would invite anyone here in the committee, and I'll send out an email through Kenna to remind you to please attend that March 2nd City Council meeting. We can give you a sense when we're closer up where it might be in the agenda, but it will be moving forward and the City Council will discuss it. It'll be the first time because of Brown Act that the rest of the City Council members will be reviewing the resolution and the Climate Safe California platform, but it is completely in line with RCPA's, the regional group's goals in terms of climate change. And so the city has committed to those goals. This is a resolution in line with it. And I guess my final comment would be that I really appreciate so early in your process, this committee actually taking the time it did, valuable, precious time, to look at Climate Safe California, the last meeting, and to endorse it. And I see that my compatriot Sarah Gurney has something to say too. So that's all I have to say, but I'm happy to answer any questions by Kenna or the co-chairs or anyone else. Thank you.
I just want to thank Diana for all the legwork that you've done, Diana, in support of my moving this forward to the council. The one point I would add is that the council is aware of Climate Safe California because once it was endorsed by the RCPA, I reported all that information at the subsequent meeting in January.
Thank you. Do we have any public comment on the Climate Safe California agenda item? All right. So I believe unless someone has something else to say, we will move on to the survey results of the climate action priorities. So I'm going to take a second here and share my screen so you can see. Nope, that's not it. Can you see the survey results now? Perfect. So we had 10 responses out of 12 potentials. So we have 11 voting members, but I asked both of the council members to go ahead and just voice their opinions because this is not a vote. This is just information gathering. And these were the points. So what really struck me is that we didn't have a kind of clear winner of like everybody wants to do one thing. And the good point that we have there is that people really want to do a lot of different things. And I think the other real lesson for me that came out of this was from reading the comments and looking at what people said and just looking at the way that these opinions were, you know, kind of stratified through these groups. Was that maybe these categories that we were pulling from our mandate from City Council, the Sebastopol Climate Action Priority List, really is due for a revision, and that we may want to, you know, kind of take what we've gotten from here and then reconstitute what those things all mean, because time has passed since that list was made. So I'm just going to read out the comments. There's not a lot of them, but just for the sake of full transparency, this is everything that was received. And just so you know, when you're looking at these colors, I think most of them are clear, but the 3 data gathering categories, you can't read all of them, and the acceleration category. So the orange data gathering, the one with the most interest, was the data gathering of annual reporting of consumption. So we got more energy for that one. The other 2, the purple was evaluation of existing municipal solar, and the dark pink was evaluation of existing building requirements for solar. And then the acceleration, the red line here, is acceleration of transportation electrification. And I'm sorry I couldn't make it show the words. But here I go with the comments. So thanks for number 1. It's not just fund a grant writer. So that's the gray line. It's identifying funding mechanisms in general. For number 2, it's not about moratoria. So that's referring to the moratoria on new fossil fuels infrastructure. moratoria are by definition temporary. We need permanent cessation bans. For all the items about solar, that's outdated. Deployments need to include storage, controls, etc. I would also add efficiency and conservation to the list. Electrification can go beyond transportation, and the electric reach code may be moot, as that appears likely to occur at the state level in Title 24. More later. That was a very useful comment. Thank you. Other comments include we would like to see a draft resolution for the city to support bringing electric reach changes to Title 24. Another member would like a calculator that provides a way to do side-by-side comparisons of the true greenhouse gas impact of various changes or practices. And the last comment is review and update the CAP, investigate how neighborhood microgrids can blanket the community. So I don't want to spend too much time talking about this. I feel like it was helpful to the chairs to be looking at how we organize presenting things and providing options. And it may well be worth trying to repeat once we have refined into maybe some different categories in the future. But that's all. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everyone. And yes, Joshua.
I have a comment and sort of a question. The first comment is that although there isn't a clear sequence there, there's sort of a few clear leading answers. So there's sort of numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, something like that are pretty clearly standing out from the pack. And then there's the rest of them. So I think that's helpful on the one front. And secondly, my question is sort of for City Council, and that they asked us to review these priorities. I'm not sure if they feel that they need like a number 1 through 10 on that. Like, are they really looking for us to say, you know, this data gathering is more important than that data gathering, or just something a little more general? So I guess I'm not sure when we will have completed this stated task, if we really have to put everything in a full sequence, or if we kind of say we think these things are more important than these things are less important. Does that get us close? That's it.
And I'm going to ask Diana or Sarah to answer that in just a sec after Jerry has a chance to ask his question, in case we need you to address his question as well.
It's not so much a question as it is a point. 3 of those were data gathering. And when we talked last time, I mentioned the metrics was important to me, because I don't think we can even address. I've noticed in the CAP, when I was looking at the CAP several weeks ago, I noticed that the measurements are all stale, and not all the measurements that are necessary to address climate were there. And since there were 3 things that talked about data gathering for me is development of metrics. And I just wanted to push for one of the large tasks for us to take on is to develop a set of community indicators, identify how they would be measured, and then we can use those as our targets going forward. And I think that would be most useful in evaluating lots of things that the council has to evaluate. Do they support that? Do they not support that? Will they make it better and not make it better? And then also it helps them figure out the thing that we just did. Did it end up with the result that we wanted it to have? And you can't find any of those unless you have the measurement. And that's why I'll keep coming back to that. And so I scored all 3 of those high, not recognizing them to be separate things. I think they're one thing.
I'm very confident that development of metrics is going to be a big part of our initial stages here. I see your hand, Woody. I'm going to, just so we don't get too far away from Joshua's question, I'm going to ask Diana to respond to Joshua's question, and then Woody, you'll go after Diana.
Thank you, Kenna. And I'm going to defer to Sarah, because Sarah Gurney was actually on the council as that decision-making was occurring. I have to say that from my perspective, as I look at the formation of this committee, I think there's a lot of discretion that rests in the hands of this committee. And so unless Sarah shares some information that indicates otherwise. My answer would be that it's discretionary with the committee in terms of the items that you address, especially since there's been some time that has passed. To the extent that you wanted some input back from the city council, that would be an easy process. You could let us know what you prioritize, and then Sarah and I can coordinate to make sure that there aren't any concerns from the perspective of the city council. Sarah, anything to add that would help clarify that?
I agree with Diana. I would just add that whatever the date, all those points were written, time has gone by. So an update would be, I think, really valuable. You know, a year goes by, we see things differently. Look, I mean, especially because in that time we've been into COVID, right? Something that we didn't anticipate. So I would welcome this group making a list that's fresher and making a list that's more in tune with your top interests. Because just think of it, you're the people, you're our resources, and you can do what you can do. You can't do more than that. And maybe you choose to focus in and work all together. Maybe you split into 3 task forces or 7, I don't know. But that's, I think, your job today is to start dialing in how you want to work together as a larger group and in smaller groups, and on what subjects. You have tremendous discretion. Because the council has its own work. We can't do all of this work. That's why we're so glad you are our brain trust and our volunteers to help us and get us to the policies and policy making that's going to protect the earth.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Woody?
Thanks. Yeah, I wasn't sure I needed to say anything because you've already said we'll look, revising the list, and then it also falls into the cap discussion. But I realized after I did this survey that there's nothing in there about natural and working land sequestration. I don't know how much of that can actually happen within the 1.9 square miles of Sebastopol, but the Climate Center has recognized that as a hugely important piece of the puzzle in addressing the climate crisis, wanting to sort of go forward and see what we can do on the the natural and working land sequestration front. So that's just what I wanted to add.
Noted. Thank you. So is there any member of the public that would like to address this agenda item before we move on to reviewing, discussing potential ad hoc task force or working group areas?
So is Zeno the only member of the public that's attending today? In which case,
I'm counting on Zeno to
everything
speak up
said?
at least once.
Well, and he's not just a member of the public, he's our community's appointee to the RCPA's Climate Action Advisory Committee. I think you're the CAAC, right, Zeno? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Another naming issue.
Right. All right, so I'm going to pass the torch over to Joshua, who's going to be facilitating the next portion of this discussion.
Okay, thanks, Kenna. So I am in this position of trying to help us get towards identifying working groups, which is, just the phrase I'm going to use right now for that subcommittee or whatever it is. To review again, per the Brown Act implications there, if our voting block in this committee is 11 people, a quorum, well, first of all, a 2/3 majority to pass a motion would be 7. A quorum would be a slight majority, which would be 6. Anything less than a quorum, which is to say 5 or fewer, can work a little more loosely without the public input requirements of the Brown Act. That's what I'm given to understand by all things I've heard on that subject so far. So I think what we're hoping for is that sometime soon, if not necessarily at the end of this meeting, which would be awesome, but sometime soonish, we can all sort of choose things that we would like to be working on. I think one person working on something could be great if it's a personal project or an action item, but in general, if we're talking about working groups, we're looking for something like 2 to 5 people. And I would think 1 or 2 working groups might be a practical maximum for any given person. Probably if you're trying to join 3 or 4 working groups, you're spreading a little thin realistically. So that's just kind of where we're at. I took a bunch of notes last time when everybody said all the things that they were interested in and tried to distill common themes out of that. And so I'm not today trying to be comprehensive and say I've covered everything that we could possibly work on, so much as I hope that everybody will find something in a shorter list of priorities that they're interested in working on. And also these working groups are sort of ad hoc, which means they come together for a purpose and they don't last forever, so that you could work on one thing for a couple of months and then sort of switch gears and all that sort of process can happen. So this again is just kind of something for us to begin to sink our teeth into. On the bigger front, I mean, one of the challenges inherent in our composition here is that we're dealing both with these huge global issues, but also trying to come up with specific tasks. And so I just want to honor that struggle between the big picture and the tangible goal is inherent in our whole process, and that's going to come up in the working groups as well. You'll see that come up a little bit further. So I'm going to go ahead and talk through the suggested categories that I've kind of come up with. I don't have a slick way to share my screen at this time, so if you all could do whatever you can to take a few notes just so you can follow along, that would be great. I can certainly repeat what I'm looking at a couple of times, but if you guys can start to jot this stuff down, that'll probably help you think about it. So here we go. Funding is something that a few people mentioned. The idea of researching funding sources and options for climate action. I noticed that also has overlap with the Sebastopol Climate Action list of priorities that we mentioned there. And so that question of, is that a grant writer? Is that something that we can take on within our committee? I think that's open. Certainly part of that process.
Josh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to interject a suggestion. Perhaps Alan could keep a list of these ideas that then he could share if you wanted him to share during the meeting.
That would be fine. Yeah, if anybody's able to support that, that'd be great. Overall, I'm going to list the categories that I have, and then it'll be sort of open forum to everybody else. And if there's something that I didn't mention that's important to you, or if you didn't find anything that you can grab onto, we'll have time for that. So this is just an initial outline. So again, funding is the first one. The second one is sort of research on allies. That it was something that was listed as part of our mission agenda of finding about the composition of similar groups or other organizations. That also relates to the idea of transferable models. If somebody else is doing something that makes sense for us to do, and vice versa. I know Luke already expressed some interest in taking point on that. A couple other people talked about that sort of connecting to related organizations or related efforts. What can we learn from that kind of cross-pollination? Number 3 for me is the subject of outreach and education. Several folks talked about wanting to spread the word within the community and potentially beyond, and to specific groups or residents or whatever that would be. So that thing of reaching the public is another big one. Fourth, the subject of energy in general and microgrids in particular. Several people over the course of our meetings have mentioned an interest in microgrids and how that might be implemented or how that might work. Of course, that's a specific thing. Then there's also sort of the bigger issues about energy and generation. Fortunately, with Sebastopol Clean Power, we're in pretty good shape around here overall, but there's always more that can be done. Fifth, the subject of transportation. Again, a few people mentioned interest in looking at those issues. That's, again, a big topic there. Next is this subject of metrics and potentially models. Several people mentioned the idea of transferable models and the desire for establishing metrics to evaluate either our work or other work locally. I'm not sure. On the one hand, that's something that could be a task, and once we had a metric, like a framework to evaluate our own work, that might be something that we establish, and then it's no longer a subcommittee. I don't know how that's going to work out, but just to honor that a lot of people talked about that. How do we measure these things? How do we at least be mindful of their transferability to other contexts? And finally, just the subject of the climate action plan update and redevelopment. I noticed from reading that's a big subject. That's a big basket that has a lot of pieces to it that, that might be something that a subcommittee or working group could take point on. And again, to kind of go back to the Brown Act thing, the idea here is that the working groups are essentially for the purposes of making progress with research and with prioritization. They're not so much a decision-making body, but an advisory body. And so the idea is that the working groups develop a bunch of thinking and research and effort on these subjects that are of interest to them, and then are sort of reporting back to the larger committee for guidance and approval, et cetera. So there's a part of this work that's, kind of on our own time on the side, and then there's a regular process of coming back to the bigger committee, presenting what you've gotten so far and saying, okay, what next? Where do we go from here? So that's kind of it for my summary at the moment. Again, my hope is that everybody can find something in there that they would be interested in working on for the short to medium term. That doesn't have to be an indefinite commitment, but yeah.
Joshua, can I read back the list from my notes, because I feel like maybe I lost one, and then I'll hand it back to you to recognize Woody. I got funding, research on allies, outreach/education, energy/microgrids, and then metrics and transferable models. Was there something I left out?
There was one more piece, which was just the subject of transportation.
Transportation, thank you. Can you see that Woody has his hand up?
Oh,
Yes, see that. Go for it.
okay. These seem good to me. I think one that was discussed that isn't here, and it might be something that could be an overarching thing, maybe not necessarily a broken out working group, but something that would be a lens through which we look at really all of these, which is equity, justice lens, social justice, equity type thing for all of it, right? And having said that, I'm wondering, isn't the metrics somewhat like that? Don't we want to have, is metrics really a separate task force, or is that something we kind of maybe need to have some chops on, and that's infused in everything? And so Barry wants to speak to that, so that's probably perfect. And I think also I got to say, outreach and education goes through all of these. So maybe the point is that there would be task forces that, figure out what the best mechanisms are for doing that work, the metrics, the outreach, whatever, and then share that with us, and we infuse it in everything we do.
So the only point I was going to make on that, Woody, is you're right in the case of metrics is across all of it. You're right also about the justice portion. That's a measure. But the metric portion is really a task to be done. Developing a set of community metrics and then using that set of metrics over and over again, how you measure it and whether we're making progress on those. And that's something that the council would end up, at least in the case of the city of Sunnyvale, the Sustainability Commission had to review it, the Planning Commission had to review it, the council had to review it each year and say, okay, this is where we went with everything, because many of the metrics aren't specific to a particular activity. Some of them might be, what amount of solar do we have in the city? What's our carbon footprint in activity, or these lists of activities? You don't know yet what those metrics will be, but they'll go across the different kinds of things that you would do. So that it's not a metric for the thing, it's not the metric for transportation. It's transportation and something else are going to influence one bit. So, and that's why the metrics is a task to be taken on. And I think it's a fairly central one.
If I could just chime in, I really like these categories. I'm thinking about just sort of last time hearing a lot of, I think the only subject where I heard more than 5 people express interest was on kind of outreach and education. So that's the only area where I think we might run into trouble with reaching a quorum. But otherwise, if it kind of seems like these can be consolidated in some way, I think that could be helpful. I'm sort of seeing like 3 that are emerging, one being outreach and education that kind of goes into the community engagement. Maybe that also has sort of community metrics woven in there a little bit and can be sort of the driving force in addressing the equity issue. The second would be research and evaluation. That would include looking at sort of what others are doing, that element of the research, also having the more technical side of the metrics and looking at the climate action plan and how all of that kind of comes together. And then the third one could potentially just be decarbonization, kind of combining the transportation, energy, microgrids, land use and sequestration. So I don't know if that's combining too many things, but I'm sort of the mind that it might be helpful for us to, narrow it down as much as we can, but without getting to beyond 5 people. So we can leave this meeting ideally with some working groups put together so we can kind of just hit the ground running, go for it. If we feel like these are too broad, then we can come back and kind of narrow it down. So would love to hear the direction of the committee if any of that sounds good, or if there's another direction we might want to go today.
Go for it, Diana.
Yeah, you went through that really quickly, Luke. Can you just kind of list those 3 categories again so that we can see exactly what they are?
Absolutely. So outreach and education, research and evaluation, and the last one would be decarbonization.
Okay, thank you. You're Joshua, you're muted.
You're muted.
Lisa, go for it.
Yeah, I almost feel like the outreach and education is kind of, part of it is going to be within transportation, part of it's going to be within, the sequestration part of it. So it almost seems like maybe it should be focused more around the subject areas. And then each subject area will have its own kind of world, So that was just what I wanted to say. I wonder if it might make sense to just kind of have a show of hands, like who's interested in working on funding, who's, just to kind of see where we are as a group. Because Luke, I thought that last energy category may be a bit broad. It may be that there's more than 5 people who want to work on various things about energy.
If I might chime back in, since nobody has their hand up at the moment. I'm a little bit of the mind that the broader we get, the less focused we can be. And so the sense of combining lots of things together, of course, there's going to be overlap and interchange, and that's what the bigger committee is. But if we're looking towards a task, I think it helps to have something a little narrower. So that's all I'll say on that. I'm not sure if
Kenna had her hand up. Kenna has her electronic hand up. It's hard to see because it's
Josh, can you? Yeah,
same
can you
color
see?
as her background, but anyway.
Yeah, it's a little hard for me to see the electronic hand. Sorry about that, folks. But
Woody had his up and then I had mine up.
Go for it, Woody.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I guess I was just going to say, I don't see, thank you, Luke, for that suggestion, but I don't really see how funding fits into any of those. And I really did feel that I wanted to focus first on really exploring what kind of funding mechanisms are out there. And so that's what I'm interested in first, really, in sort of, in terms of what I'd want to dive into and focus on. And I just don't see that as being what any of those categories you mentioned would retain funding a working group.
And then I was kind of backing up what Woody was saying there. I think the decarbonization and what Joshua was saying, the decarbonization as one group feels like at least 2 groups, one more focused on like the sequestration piece of it and the other on the energy piece and the microgrid piece. I did the same thing Joshua did of kind of taking a lot of notes and looking at everything. And, one of the ways we could go is to decide on like two big things, like we're going to go for this replicability, which was a huge theme, right? And say like, what are the models that are missing that need to be out there, right? So what do we want to create that other people could copy? And doing a really like aggressive microgrid campaign could be one of those, and then then the sequestration piece would be another one, and then focusing all of the other funding, metrics, education, et cetera, around two big initiatives, whatever, or one big initiative, whatever we decided to do, might help us focus and meet a lot of the needs. I believe it was Dina spoke to, trying to choose things that have a kind of broad reach and a lot of co-benefits in different areas. So that would be one way to focus us. But I think decarbonization creates too large of a category. And at the same time, I agree that we don't want to have too many working groups. So I'll pass this over. I'll pass it back to you, Joshua, to figure out whose hand went up first.
I'm seeing Jerry.
So I agree. The larger divisions doesn't help me all that much in organizing. I was going to suggest that we actually have something in front of us that tells us, and maybe the breakdown is too soon. And the reason that I think the breakdown is too soon is I think our first job is to go back, look at the climate action plan, evaluate the climate action plan, restructure it, and in fact, rewrite the climate action plan. And in doing that, we would then see, oh, these are the areas we need to focus on. And at that point, we would identify the different groups and different activities that we would want to take on to follow up. So the first is to organize the picture, as opposed to drill down into one specific area. In looking at the climate action plan, and I know we're not in that section yet, the pie chart by itself tells us an awful lot about where we are and what we have to do. The discussion in it that I want to bring up later on is, as Woody just finished saying, is it the 1.9 square miles that we have here, or is it the population that we serve that our climate action plan needs to focus on? And the activities that we take on, is it the community that we serve, which is closer to 30 to 40 to 50,000 people, than the 7,800 people that we have? And that's part of the discussion we should have even before we have this list.
Okay, since nobody else has a hand up at the moment that I can.
Dina has her hand up.
Dina has her. Oh, there we go. Dina, please.
Okay, thank you. I like what Kenneth said about separating out the decarbonization for many reasons. One is a lot of people are now familiar in the general public with the idea of reducing greenhouse gas through reducing fossil fuel use and all the energy options and things like that. But as Woody said earlier, carbon sequestration is super important in getting where we need to go. And with carbon sequestration, that's a really, I heard some of us in the other meetings talk about our interest in that. And I think it's a really easy, good way of exposing people to, that's the other part of the equation, not just the energy use and what kind of energy we use, and involving community involvement, and the fact that it's coming into spring and COVID increased a lot of gardeners in our area. We live in a semi-rural area. There's, in my mind, there's a lot of reasons to consider if there's a few of us that want to simultaneously, while we're doing all these other tasks at the beginning, come up with some carbon sequestration to jump right into for this time of year and for the reasons I tried to express to you.
Diana.
Yeah, a couple of comments. I really like the idea. I just want to remind the group that this is a group of citizens who have stepped up to get something done. And I think as a group, you need to respect that part of the direction that you take here should be driven by the interests of the group, and that that's okay. So I just want to recognize the suggestion that was made a few minutes ago, where you just kind of, I would add sequestration to the list, but that otherwise you just do a poll initially, because that might give you an indication. I see about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have seen 9 categories if you add sequestration to your list, and I know there are 11 people in the room. So you might end up knowing what sort of interest level you have in each area just by doing that. So that's just my suggestion. And yes, the big overall picture is really important, but I get the sense that there is just a need to grasp and do something meaningful that is passionate and comes from your heart in this group. And I just would urge you to respect that. Thanks.
Luke, please.
I'll just follow up. Sorry, mic over here. I'll just follow up really quickly that I totally agree. Totally just a brainstorm in terms of the consolidation. I think it's much better to keep the categories under decarb separated because I think they're going to generate more interest too. I guess the one that I was most thinking could be helpful to consolidate would be kind of the research and evaluation one with the research, metrics and models, the kind of cap direction and maybe funding in there as well. And my main reason for that is I don't know if anybody other than Jerry and myself are going to be interested in some of that more dry subject matter. So I would hope to get as many of us in that as possible. So that's kind of the only one that I'm really in favor of consolidating. And thank you all very much for that feedback.
Okay, I'm sorry, was there another hand coming up there? Okay, well, on the one hand, I'm trying to synthesize and take in everything that everybody is saying. On the other hand, I'm trying to, move us along and figure out how to proceed. As we have all discussed here, a lot of these things link to each other. There's a lot of overlapping concerns. Again, from the standpoint of working groups, if we're all working on the same thing, we can't really do it offline in between. So there is a need to separate things into categories and into more specific tasks, which can be shorter term or medium term. And also, as Diana was saying, let's try to follow our interests. Let's all find a way that we can bring our excitement to this and not have it become too dry, as we were saying. That being the case, I'm not how do people feel about the idea of putting this out more as a poll or a survey for next time? Do we feel like we can't really group up just yet, or and the other option as I see it would be something like a show of hands, like sort of we go through the whole list, everybody throws up a hand if they are interested in that category. Okay, I'm seeing a bunch of thumbs up on that. So what I'm going to do, if it's a form of facilitation, is just sort of read through the list. I will read each category. Hold up your hand if you legitimately, not conceptually, not in an abstract sense, if you personally would like to work on that in, say, the next couple of months. The electronic hands are hard to see, so if you could just hold your hand up on the screen for, say, 10 seconds or however long it's going to take. I'm just going to tally those hands. And you can put multiple answers out there. And so this is like a quick survey of that. All right, funding. Who's
Josh, I'm just wondering, it might be helpful for everyone if you just run, either Alan puts it on the list or I can list it because I wrote it down, but just run through energy, transportation, sequester, the categories for us really quickly.
Okay, so what I've got is funding, allied research, outreach education, microgrid energy, transportation, models and metrics, climate action plan development, and sequestration. Anything else that I should throw on there?
And Joshua, do you want us to choose, like, we can't raise our hands to everything?
Well, I would suggest that let's not worry about that right now. Probably don't, try to pick your top three, say, but if you're legitimately could work on 4 different things, I don't want to shut you down on that front. My guess is that some of these things will have not enough responses, and some of them will have too many responses, and we'll try to find a middle ground. So far, so good? Okay, funding, hands for funding. Hold them high, hold them proud. Okay, I got 1, 2, 3. Lisa, Woody, Luke, thank you. Okay, research about, allied related efforts. Hold up, say it loud, say it proud. I got Luke, you are in a field of your own there, I'm afraid. Okay, outreach and education. Oh, and okay, let's see. Outreach, education. 1, 2, 3, 4. I seem to recall Alex mentioning interest in that, but I can't see his hand, so maybe he could do the things. Okay, Dina, Sarah, Lisa, Kenna, and Sonali, got you. Okay, microgrid or energy generation issues. Jerry, yes. Lisa, yes. Kenna, yes. Once I say your name, you can feel free to drop your hand. I think that'll be my easy way to get you off the hook there. Okay, moving on, transportation. Who's into transportation? Transportation, anybody? I know a few people mentioned that, but hey, if it's not hot for you, just be honest. Okay, Woody, transportation, great, okay. Okay, the subject of models and metrics as, generalized and interconnected as it is. Jerry, Luke, Kenna, yes, okay. Anything else? All right. Sequestration, the new kid on the block here. Anybody else? Dina, yes. Sarah, yes. Anybody else there? Okay.
Molly,
And I'm sorry, what?
did you see?
Yes, Sonali, got it. Thank you. And the climate action plan redevelopment subjects. Jerry, yes. I myself am somewhat interested in that subject. Anybody else on the climate action plan? Okay, so just to recap here, funding, I got 3 people, which is a great number. Allied research, I got 1 person, which is a lonely number. Outreach and education was 5 people, which is almost too many, but that's a good thing. Microgrid energy, we got 3 people, again, a great number. Transportation, 2 people. Models and metrics, 3. Climate action plan, 2. Sequestration, 4.
Equity, social justice was on the list.
Social equity, let's put that one in there. Social equity. Okay, hands for social equity, environmental justice. Woody, Kenna, Joshua, 1, 2, 3. Gotcha, Kenna. Okay. Well, I am almost at a loss as to what next step to take here. So I'm open to suggestions. I would say that the allied research front is a little hard. Luke, bless your soul, if you want to do something on that in your spare time, which must be limited, feel free. We don't necessarily have the power. Diana, is that an interest in that subject as well?
I would be willing to join Luke in that effort.
Great, great.
If it survives the cut.
Okay. Okay.
Joshua, you can take me off of the education to prune that back a little bit.
Okay, sure. Back to 4. Okay. Well, I will. What I'm going to do here is read from the least popular to the most popular in that sense. So next up, we have transportation with merely 2 people. It's a big subject that, doesn't mean we have to work on it right now. Are we okay with kind of letting that slide for the present, aside from, general recommendations? Okay. The climate action plan.
Joshua, there were 2 robust head shakes no from some important people in the room. So
Sorry,
Well,
this whole
maybe-
Zoom thing is like.
maybe they want to say something on that.
Okay, let's go back to that again. Transportation. Anybody who's adamant about talking about transportation, speak now, please.
Diana, you're welcome to go first.
Go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I just, well, an overall comment. It looks like you have people interested in all of these topics. So one overall question might be whether there are some who feel over committed, because if everyone feels like they've expressed interest in areas that they think they can handle, then maybe you've got your task forces. So just a general comment. And then in terms of transportation, that's to me a key content piece that needs to be addressed, kind of sequestration. Those are both meaty pieces that are not maybe the big global ones, but affect locally. So I would hate to see you guys abandon that.
I'm not saying abandon in terms of
maybe later. Got it.
Categorical or complete. I think we're going to be addressing all of these issues again. It's just a question of in the short term moving forward, where's the energy to make progress? I think we can keep checking back in on all these priorities.
Okay, got it. I actually thank you for kind of resetting my perspective. That makes complete sense and is consistent with your earlier comment that some of these would be short things and then you get onto a different topic.
Yeah, my sense is like 9 working groups is just going to be unwieldy. So I'm hoping we can get it down to sort of at least 3 to 5. And you know, if those working groups are able to complete a task and then their interests go elsewhere, or if, you know, and we're going to keep reconvening in this larger quorum, and we can keep bringing up those other issues. And, you know, let's all try to keep each other on those various tasks and not forget things, which is working out great so far. Thank you.
That's all good and well, but I have to say, my perspective wasn't reset by any of those comments. We have to look at transportation. You know, it's like what's the statistic? 70% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation. What is our community like, right? We have 2 major highways that are our downtown intersection. We have cars everywhere, parking lots everywhere. We have a housing crisis because we have cars everywhere instead of housing. I mean, I think it's got to be a really important topic. So my suggestion would be, Joshua, if after this meeting, you could publish the list of the groups and the people who signed up for them, then maybe people can realize, oh my goodness, I signed up for 5. I've got to trim myself back, or this is more important than that for me. I think that would be helpful. And maybe these informal groups want to have a conversation to assess how much energy they have together instead of deciding now without the people actually being allowed to convene that they're not so significant right now. I mean, try it out and see where the energy lies. Diana, you're laughing.
Because I think and Jerry, you have a comment and we need to not monopolize this, but I do think there's a balance here. There's what the city council, you know, what we on the city council might prioritize. And then I have to go back to my earlier statement. You are defining who you are. This is a long-term standing committee. And so you need to go with your passions and your interests. So just saying.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just listening to Sarah's argument. And so, Sarah, you know, from my background that I've done a lot with transportation already. And the problem with our community is, in fact, when you guys interviewed me for the Planning Commission, I said what was the major problem? It was the traffic, and the real problem was this: you can't get rid of it because if you did, you'd kill the city, because that traffic also makes it so that we have so many grocery stores and bookstores and other things. The problem with the transportation, and I'm going to come back to the same thing again, is it's the largest problem, but the solutions are not obvious. A lot of the solutions fit with land use and other pieces, because you need to stop needing people to go where they need to go in diverse places, and that's actually a major problem in the community. I don't know if this committee can handle that. It can handle things like what Woody's been working on with, you know, gas, and make it easier for us to have electric and things like that. But changing the fundamental form of transportation, I know Zeno's been pushing on how can we get more active transportation as part of the mix? But it's hard because of where we are and how we're isolated. And in fact, even some of the legislation that we've had in the last few years about zones between cities makes that more difficult.
That's
Sorry.
why you didn't volunteer for that committee, buddy.
Yeah, I know. That's the reason I didn't. I'm really interested in it. Sorry, one last point. The point was this: the climate action plan would determine whether that would fit or not. And that's why I think just voting on what I want to work on doesn't make sense to me. It needs to be part of a larger plan.
Yeah. So Joshua, I'm going to hand this back to you, but I just want to call your attention to the fact that we have 8 minutes remaining.
That's what I was just going to say. We've got 8 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it is. We've got a couple other things that we're trying to cover here. You know, transportation is huge. It's already being worked on in lots of ways. I'm not going to say more on that, but like if we don't address things in the short term, that doesn't mean they're disappearing or not being worked on. It's not all on us, right? There's lots of other people working on all this stuff. So we don't have to take on everything. My sense is that we're not going to work this out in the next 8 minutes while also acknowledging our other things. So in something related to action items for the next time, I will post this list through Alan very soon, listing the categories, listing the counts of people who recognized interest. I did not take down everybody's names who put their hands up because it wasn't that, we didn't have the time for that. And I would say, suggest this as homework for next time, that people can try to pick their top 2, maybe 3 things that they would like to work on in the next season. Let's say this spring, what sort of task would you want to take on? It will be easy to come up with tasks in any of these categories. Like I said, there's a tension between the big picture versus something that's actionable that we're always going to be encountering. So with that, if people don't mind, I'd like to kind of end this part of it, having tabled it to that format. And there's a couple other things. Diana, yes, anything else on this subject before we move on?
Do you want to provide an opportunity for public comment on this subject?
Yeah, do we have public who want to comment? We can.
Okay.
Diana, do you have?
I just wanted to report out that in fact, Alan did keep track of the names of people who were interested in each category. So that might help you, Joshua, connecting with them. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Alan.
So it looks like we do have public comment. Go ahead, Zeno.
Yeah, I put it in the chat. I wonder whether you guys can pull like people from outside the committee into a working group. And so I'm, as Sarah just mentioned a while ago, representing the city with the county. And one of my focus area is transportation. So that may be, I'm not just stepping up myself, but this general issue, maybe you can pull in an expert on a topic, on a certain, like financing, for example. There's expertise that is focused on financing that you could pull in to sit on a working group.
So I'll chime in for this one. So I know with our public arts committee, part of their subcommittees can have public volunteers acting on it. So I'm confirming I sent an email to the city attorneys to confirm that that's okay, or if we have to have an active list of volunteers, or if we can just have volunteers join the subcommittees. So I'll follow up with that as soon as I get a response.
Thank you, Alan. All right. So Joshua, are you done with that section?
Yes, please.
Thank you so much for taking that on. That was a hard, complicated conversation to try to start off today. So obviously we are running out of time, and we will table item F, the initial discussion of approach to the CAP update. We touched on it a little bit today. Hopefully we'll have a good plan for kind of digging into that topic next time. And then I'd just like to give a chance for members to suggest items for next meeting agenda. Yes, Lisa.
I'm still kind of looking into this, but as far as I can gather, the city of Sebastopol has still not sent a letter of support to the California Energy Commission regarding the Title 24 changes to the energy code. Several other cities have. And I'd like to just, first of all, make sure that's not already going, but get some draft going that we might be able to present to the council to see if they'd like to do that.
I'm
Great.
not aware that that's agendized yet, but if you would like a letter of support from under the mayor's signature from the
It would-
council, it's a matter of putting it on the agenda. And Diana or I could do that for you. Or
Great.
both of us, yeah. From this committee onto the agenda, yeah.
So if you want to just tell
Follow
us
up.
that this can serve as that telling us to do that, or you can wait and discuss it at the next meeting.
Oh, we're down to 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So I feel like maybe we'll wait till next meeting.
Sounds good.
Since it's not on the agenda. Anything else for next meeting? I believe, Jerry, you brought up a point earlier.
I think whatever I brought up before, I think the first thing we should do in the next meeting is I would dedicate the entire next meeting talking about reviewing the cap and see what approaches we want as far as how we, how much do we want to update, what do we want to do with it. I think the cap is a document that this committee ought to own. It's the primary working document for us.
All right. Anyone else have items that they would like on next meeting agenda? All right. Joshua, do you want to do our review of action items?
Okay, Woody's got his hand up.
Oh, I thought that was a thumbs up, Woody. I thought
That
you
was
were
that
seconding
was-
Jerry.
That was a thumbs up, Jerry, to your proposal about swallowing up the next meeting with the cap. That sounds good.
Well, as such things go, I sort of just came up with the one action item, which is to say for Alan and myself to get this list of working groups up and for everybody to review that a bit and kind of come to the next meeting with your top couple of preferences. I'm hoping, I fully support us working on the cap the next time. We're supposed to read it for today. Keep chewing on it, I would guess. And if folks could try to sort out the working group notion, at least in their own mind. And then Lisa, I'm not sure if the point you brought up was an action item in a way or where that was left, but I just want to acknowledge that we're proposing that the city council come up with. So I'm not sure if Lisa, you would want to, I guess, bring up that discussion next time and maybe take point on that point at the next meeting. Does that work?
I
Okay.
was thinking I could draft something and just see if it was acceptable to the group that we might be able to pass on to the council.
That would be great. That would be
Can
great.
you educate us at the same time?
And so everybody knows, we ran into a little Brown Act trouble this last time in that anything we're addressing in the meeting has to be put in the agenda, and the agenda essentially has to come out a week beforehand because a lot of city staff isn't there on Friday. We kind of need anything that we're going to send out to the group in by the Wednesday or the Thursday before the following meeting. So just to say, if you have things that you would like to submit along that front, whether it's materials for people to review or suggestions for the agenda, feel free to be in touch with, Kenna, Luke, myself, and or Alan. But just notice that it has to come in effectively a week ahead of the next meeting if we're going to bring it up at the next meeting. So.
Yes. So, and I believe Alan is going to come back next meeting with confirmation of, how we can supplement our working groups with outside experts, volunteers, etc. So thank you so much for your time today and for continuing to be part of this group. We will be closing down. I do want to acknowledge that these first startup meetings are sometimes frustrating because it's like we all just want to get to work and we have to talk through a bunch of like who's going to be in what group first. But our intention as a group of co-chairs is to really get us digging in as soon as possible and keep moving that forward. So please reach out to us with questions or concerns between now and the next meeting, and we will let you go. Thank you all.
Bye.
Everyone. Diana, can you count a little bit after this to discuss some non-related things?
I'll stick around.